You're just an uneducated old woman. Stay out of our business." Those were the last words my daughter-in-law Emily threw at me, right in the middle of her husband's birthday party. Her husband, who also happens to be my son. She said it in front of dozens of people, friends, family, even those I once raised, fed, and tucked into bed. But you know what hurt the most? Not the words themselves. It was the silence. No one said a word. No one even looked at me, as if I were invisible. A nameless old woman, someone without a voice, without value. I sat there, still holding my fork, a piece of unfinished cake trembling in my hand. My heart clenched. I couldn't cry. I couldn't defend myself. I just sat there, swallowing a pain no words could possibly describe. If you've ever been insulted, humiliated in front of others, you know exactly what that moment feels like. My name is Margaret Allen. I'm 70 years old. I've spent my life giving everything to my family. I was once a mother, a wife, a grandmother, but in that moment, I was nothing more than someone to be dismissed. I didn't get angry. I didn't throw my drink or shout back. This wasn't one of those dramatic TV moments. There was just me, and a quiet kind of pain, like a storm that rolls in without thunder, one no one even notices. Or worse, they just don't care. But if you think I stayed silent forever, you're wrong, because sometimes silence is just the beginning of an earthquake. Emily, my daughter-in-law, she woke someone I had long buried, a woman who once stood in courtrooms, who once signed contracts with a firm hand, who once made entire rooms fall silent when she spoke. And Emily, she had no idea who she was talking to. This isn't just a story about a mother disrespected by her daughter-in-law. It's about standing up at 70 years old. It's about reclaiming your voice. Not through shouting, but through patience, wisdom, and a kind of dignity that no one gets to step on. If you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been hurt by your own family, stay here with me. And if you're watching this video, please hit that subscribe button so I can keep telling stories like this. And leave me a comment. I was once disrespected, but I stood back up. Because sometimes, all we need is one person who understands us. My name is Margaret Allen. I was born in a small town near Oregon. When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a lawyer. I used to sit under the old oak tree in the park every afternoon, buried in thick law books. But life doesn't care about your dreams. Life asks, how much are you willing to sacrifice for your family? I got married at 22 to David Allen, a civil engineer. He was a gentle, quiet man who always knew how to make me laugh. We had one son, James, the greatest pride of my life. James was bright, polite, and driven from a young age. I poured all my youth into raising him, taught him each letter, walked him to school every day, worked night shifts just to afford his books. David was always away on construction sites, so I played both mother and father. I never complained. I just wanted James to become a good man, and he did. He graduated college and became a software engineer at a major company. Every time I saw him on stage, receiving an award or degree, I knew every calloused hand, every sleepless night. It was all worth it. Then James got married to Emily, a beautiful, sharp woman who graduated from a prestigious university and worked in real estate. The first time he brought her home, I noticed the look in her eyes, cold, calculating, and a bit arrogant. But I told myself, as long as she loves my son, I can accept anything else. I tried to fit in. Every holiday, I prepared big dinners, bought gifts for the whole family, including Emily. I called her daughter and treated her as my own blood. I looked after our grandson, Lucas, when they were busy at work. I cooked, cleaned, picked him up from school. I became the nameless support in the background, never asking for recognition. But then, I started to feel something was off. Emily grew distant. She stopped calling me Mom and started addressing me as Margaret. cold like a stranger. Family dinners got shorter. Hugs and thank yous disappeared. One day, I overheard her say to James, "She's living off us. We're basically carrying that old lady. Do you see other people letting their mother-in-law live with them like this?" I was speechless. I was living in their house, but it was a house that David and I had saved up to buy for James when he got married. We signed the papers to help with the loan and then transferred ownership to him. But now, the house no longer carried my name, and neither did the family. After David passed away, I moved in with James, thinking he would care for me in my old age. But the truth was, I became their unpaid maid. I woke up before everyone, cooked breakfast, cleaned, took care of Lucas, and every day, Emily treated me like a burden. James stayed silent. He's the kind of man who prefers peace over confrontation. I don't blame him. I only blame myself for raising him to be too obedient, too willing to endure. Little by little, I learned to keep quiet. I stopped asking questions. I stopped giving advice. I shrank into the background, a shadow in the house. Everyone knew I was there, but no one wanted to see me. I even tried going out to look for part-time jobs, just to feel useful. But Emily stopped me. She said, "Just stay home and watch Lucas. Who's going to hire a 70-year-old woman anyway?" I smiled sadly. Maybe she was right. A 70-year-old woman, no college degree, outdated skills, failing memory. Who would hire me? Who would even care? But then, something changed everything. I discovered Emily was secretly transferring ownership of the house, the one under her and James's name, to someone else. That's when I started to get suspicious. Why? Why move it? And then I realized this was the beginning of their plan, to remove me from their lives. I didn't tell anyone. I just quietly took notes, gathered information, took photos of documents, and read emails whenever I had the chance. And that's when I realized I couldn't sit still any longer. I used to be strong. How did I become so helpless? I started documenting everything, every action, every word. I started learning again, searching the internet, reading law books, reaching out to old friends. Because I knew, if I wanted to reclaim my voice, I couldn't do it through tears. I had to do it with intellect. Ever since Margaret moved in with the family of her only son, Ethan, her life seemed to turn a new chapter. She no longer had her old, worn little house. No more quiet mornings making coffee in her familiar kitchen, staring out at her small flower garden. Instead, she had a small room in the basement, prepared for her by her daughter-in-law, Jessica. At first, Margaret didn't mind. She thought to herself, as long as I'm with my son, close to my grandson, it's worth it. But things weren't what she imagined. Jessica never wanted her there. Her cold gaze, those smirks loaded with unspoken judgment, and every passive-aggressive comment, like tiny needles, pierced Margaret's heart a little more each day. Jessica began to make her disapproval known. She divided up household chores, dumping the cooking and cleaning on Margaret's shoulders. "You're home all day anyway. Might as well make yourself useful," Jessica would say, smiling with her mouth, but never her eyes. Margaret said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she didn't want to put her son in a difficult position. Ethan was always busy with work, coming home late, and he seemed blissfully unaware of the subtle changes in his own house. Then one evening, during dinner, Jessica made a snide remark in front of their guests. "I mean, come on, who still doesn't know how to use email? Honestly, your mom is so uneducated." The words cut through the laughter and clinking of cutlery at their grandson's birthday party. The room fell into an eerie silence. People looked away, some awkwardly chuckled. Ethan forced a nervous laugh and patted his mother's shoulder as if to brush it off. But to Margaret, it felt like a dagger. From that moment on, things went downhill. Jessica began whispering to Ethan in the kitchen, deliberately loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Let's be real. Your mom is just in the way. We should look into a nursing home. A lot of people do that." One night, Jessica handed Margaret a stack of papers. Just a consent form for temporary residence. It's nothing big, just sign here. Trusting her son and daughter-in-law, Margaret signed it. She didn't read it carefully. A few days later, Margaret found out her old house, the one she had lived in for over 30 years, had been sold. No call, no warning, no discussion. When she confronted Ethan, he just scratched his head. Jessica said you already agreed. You signed the papers, remember? Margaret was speechless. Then one early morning, Jessica stood at her door, suitcase in hand, and dropped it on the floor. You should move out. We need the space. No anger, no shouting, just cold finality, like she was asking the maid to leave after her shift. Margaret managed to ask one question. Where am I supposed to go? Jessica replied without hesitation. Anywhere. You're an adult. You'll figure it out. With nowhere else to turn, Margaret stayed at the home of her old friend Helen, a retired co-worker from the city library. In a cramped little room, filled with boxes and dusty memories, she sat alone, with the deed of her house resting quietly in her lap. Everything had happened so fast. A lifetime of savings, gone, her dignity trampled, and the son she loved more than life itself stood there and said nothing. But the most painful part wasn't the betrayal, or even the lies. It was being treated like she didn't matter, by her own flesh and blood, like a worn-out relic, shoved aside to make room for something newer. That night, Margaret didn't cry. She sat by the window, the wind rustling through the trees. No tears in her eyes, just a cold emptiness, like the winter wind slipping through a thin coat. No one asked if she was okay. No one wondered where she had gone. No one knew who they had just pushed aside. No one knew the quiet strength of the woman they had dismissed. No one knew. This was only the beginning. After officially embarking on her journey to study law, Margaret transformed into a completely different person. The woman everyone assumed had collapsed now lived as if she had only one goal: to understand the law so she could save herself. For 3 full years, Margaret continued attending classes while working night shifts. She was a regular presence at public court hearings, quietly observing and taking notes. At 70, she was the oldest student in her class, but also the most diligent. At first, her classmates assumed she was just studying for fun, but gradually, as they witnessed the sharpness in her questions and the meticulous detail in her essays, they began to look at Margaret differently, with admiration. In the campus library, she would sit for hours researching a single law related to inheritance rights. Every line she read seemed to empower her. She started recalling every detail from the past, the moment she signed the documents, her daughter-in-law's vague remarks, the evasive glances from the family lawyer. Margaret wasn't just learning the law, she was learning how to seek justice, not with tears, but with intellect. On a freezing winter day, Margaret walked into the county archive office. In her hand was a list of documents she wanted to investigate: contracts, power of attorney forms, old wills. The young clerk looked at her with surprise. "Are you researching a case, ma'am?" Margaret gave a small smile. "Just a personal one, dear, but it's my whole life." She discovered a strange detail. The largest piece of land that had been in her name was transferred to her son and daughter-in-law just weeks after her husband's death, without any legal documentation proving her consent. This compelled Margaret to dig deeper. Then, on a rainy weekend afternoon, she reunited with Linda, an old friend who had once been a secretary at that very law firm. Linda was hesitant at first, but after hearing Margaret's story, her expression softened. "Margaret, I'm so sorry for staying silent back then, but I still have a copy of the internal files. If you need them, I'm willing to hand them over." That was the final puzzle piece Margaret needed to complete the picture. From that day on, she began writing everything down: journal entries, evidence, transcripts of old conversations. She learned how to draft a legal complaint, how to approach the court, and how to defend herself during a hearing. One night, she stood by the window of her tiny rented room, the one she'd lived in for over 3 years. Outside, the dim yellow streetlight shimmered on her silver hair. Margaret smiled, not because she was happy, but because she was finally at peace. She had reclaimed herself. And now she was ready to step into the light, not as a humiliated mother, but as a woman who understood her worth. No shouting, no revenge, just truth and determination. Margaret officially filed a lawsuit with the city court, not out of vengeance, but to reclaim her dignity, her justice, and the years that had been stolen from her. And from that very moment, a quiet reckoning began. No one noticed that Mrs. Evelyn, after all those years of silence, had quietly prepared for one final battle. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Her second year after leaving that house passed in silence, but it was far from meaningless. Every day, after her shift at the small-town bookstore, Mrs. Evelyn would head to the public library. Her hands trembled, her eyes strained to read at times, but she persisted. A woman in her 70s, relearning civil law, property law, and the process of dispute resolution, just to prove one thing: I'm not the fool you think I am. She met a young lawyer named Amanda, someone who had also suffered at the hands of a cruel mother-in-law and who deeply empathized. They met at a local seminar. Amanda said, "I'll help you for free, but I need one promise, that you won't give up halfway." Evelyn simply smiled. "Sweetheart, if I'm still standing today, nothing can bring me down." 3 months later, the lawsuit was filed. Evelyn sued her son and daughter-in-law for asset misappropriation, forgery, and exploiting her trust to coerce her into signing over ownership of the family home and her shares in the family business. No one believed an old woman living in a trailer could drag her entire family to court. Jason, her son, panicked the moment he received the court summons. Sarah was furious, shouting in the conference room at her lawyer, "She's got nothing but a few pieces of paper. Who's going to believe an old woman that close to the grave?" But Amanda, Evelyn's lawyer, had come fully prepared. Secret recordings of phone calls, original documents with visible tampering, testimonies from neighbors, a therapist, and even the notary public who had witnessed Sarah pressuring Evelyn into signing the agreement while she was mentally unwell. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed, not only because of the nature of the case, but also because local media had picked up the story. They wanted to cover the headline, "71-year-old woman sues her son and daughter-in-law for stealing her home and honor." Evelyn wore a simple gray suit, her hair neatly tied up. She still looked frail, still as gentle as always. But her eyes, those eyes were no longer those of a resigned mother. They were the eyes of a woman who had been trampled on, but never broken. Every word she spoke in that courtroom silenced the crowd. "I once loved my son unconditionally. I once called my daughter-in-law daughter because I never had one of my own. But I was deceived, rejected, and humiliated in front of the very people I once called family." She paused, her voice trembling, but continued, "I'm not here to see them in prison. I just want the truth to be returned to where it belongs. I am not uneducated. I've just been silent for far too long." As the evidence was presented, Jason hung his head while Sarah tried to maintain her composure, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Cameras from the press flashed non-stop. The entire town witnessed a stunning reversal, led not by anger, but by intelligence. Finally, the court ruled. The property transfer agreement was invalidated due to coercion. Evelyn regained full ownership of her house and former assets. Jason and Sarah were ordered to issue a public apology and compensate her for defamation. The courtroom fell silent. A few people wept. Amanda held Evelyn's hand tightly. "You did it, you won." Evelyn only nodded. No triumphant smile, just a quiet sense of relief. On the way out of the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. A middle-aged woman stepped forward and took Evelyn's hand. You're an inspiration to all of us. I was mistreated by my daughter-in-law too, but I never had the courage to stand up." Evelyn looked at her, gently holding her hand. "Start with silence, but don't end there." Her story quickly went viral across social media. TV stations reported on it. Many people sent letters to the little bookstore where she once worked, asking to meet her, to say thank you. No one called her uneducated anymore. Now they called her an extraordinary woman. After that fateful trial, the whole town buzzed with talk, partly due to the unexpected collapse of what once seemed like a model family, but also because the woman they thought was the weakest turned out to be the strongest of them all. But Evelyn didn't let herself get swept up in public attention. She didn't talk to the press, didn't post on social media, didn't appear on TV. The next day, she quietly left the courthouse and returned to her tiny trailer on the edge of town, a place with only sunlight, trees, and silence. No one called her mom or mother-in-law anymore, and no one called her uneducated either, not because they knew her academic background, but because now they knew who she was. She spent a few weeks doing absolutely nothing. No plans, no worries, no responsibilities. She sat on the creaky old wooden chair on her porch, sipping herbal tea, reading books, and watching the sunlight shift through the hours. Simple routines that brought back a sense of life she had long lost. Occasionally, a few townspeople stopped by. They brought baked goods, fruit, or just a warm hug. No one mentioned the trial. No one asked about Sarah or Jason. They just sat with her, quietly, as if their presence alone was the deepest form of support. 1 month later, Evelyn returned to her old house. The home that had once witnessed so much love, only to become a battlefield of greed and betrayal. She didn't return for the material things. She returned to face the memories, to clean them up, to revive them, and to turn them into a new chapter. She repainted the doors, replaced all the curtains with thin cream-colored fabric. On the walls, she rehung the old paintings, keeping only those of nature and of her family from the days when her husband was still alive. The living room became a cozy reading corner where anyone could drop by, sit down, and find peace in the pages of a book. She named the newly restored house the second chapter, because to Evelyn, life doesn't end with loss. It simply changes direction. Rumors of the healing house spread quickly across town. People started coming to Evelyn, not out of curiosity, but because they needed someone to listen. There was a young woman recently divorced, a middle-aged man estranged from his children, an elderly lady grieving her partner of 50 years. Evelyn didn't preach. She simply brewed tea, listened quietly, and sometimes she shared a part of her own story, in a calm voice, without bitterness, without sorrow. She often said, "Forgiveness isn't something you give so others will change. Forgiveness is what helps you change first." One day, as Evelyn was watering her garden, she received a handwritten letter with no return address. The paper was old, but the handwriting was unmistakably familiar. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I had hurt you. You may never forgive me, but I hope you know how deeply I regret everything." Evelyn recognized Jason's handwriting, the son she once believed would love her until the end of her days. She read the letter without tears, without anger. She simply folded it and placed it into a small wooden box where she kept mementos of her late husband. Then she looked out at the garden, where the lavender was blooming in full color. "I forgave you long ago. You just didn't know it yet." As time passed, Evelyn began offering free weekend classes in her modest home. She taught elderly folks how to write memoirs. She taught children how to keep journals. There were no certificates, no grades, just joy and connection. Those classes slowly became a sanctuary, a space where people came not to be judged, but to heal. Evelyn was also invited to speak at schools and community centers, sharing her story of resilience. And every time, she ended her talk with a gentle smile and these words, "I didn't choose revenge. I didn't choose bitterness. I chose to live better, so I could prove I had never truly lost. One early spring afternoon, as Evelyn was arranging wildflowers in a glass jar, a little girl from next door ran over and sat beside her. "My mum says you're the bravest lady in the whole town." Evelyn chuckled and patted the girl's head. "I'm just someone who stayed silent for too long." Then one day, I learned how to speak. The girl nodded and leaned in to kiss Evelyn's cheek. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and in that quiet moment, she knew. No matter how much she had lost, her heart still had room to love again. Evelyn did not win through hatred. She won through wisdom, through patience, through quiet strength and forgiveness. And that is the most beautiful and lasting victory any human being can ever achieve. I don't know where you are in your life right now. I don't know what you're going through. But if you're still listening to me at this point in the story, then I believe one thing. You have carried, or are carrying, a kind of pain that's hard to put into words. Maybe you're a mother who gave up her youth for her family, only to be treated one day as if you were a stranger. Maybe you're a wife who stood silently behind her husband and children, doing everything, while no one remembered to even say thank you. Or maybe you're just a woman who lived with all her heart and got hurt by the very people she trusted most. If that's you, I understand, truly. I've sat alone in the dark asking myself, what did I do wrong? How could they say something so cruel? Why did I give my whole life only to be left in tears? There were nights I couldn't sleep, not because I was scared, but because the pain just sat there, heavy in my chest. I thought about fighting back. I wanted to scream, just to prove I wasn't the uneducated woman my daughter-in-law shouted I was in front of everyone. But in the end, I chose a different path. I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to speak through my actions, not my anger. I went back to school, I rediscovered myself, and I waited, patiently, until the truth spoke for itself. And you know what? In the end, it wasn't revenge that lifted me up. Not a slap, not harsh words, not a dramatic comeback. It was the small things, knowledge, kindness, and the decision to say, I won't let this pain kill my heart. So if someone is treating you unfairly right now, if someone has mocked you, insulted you, dismissed you, because they didn't know who you really are, then let me tell you something. You don't need to scream to prove your worth. You just need to keep living with integrity, day by day, and the world will see. You are not invisible, you are not weak, and you are absolutely not uneducated. Just because someone lacked the decency to recognize your intelligence, your patience, and your powerful heart, I'm not sharing this story for your pity. I'm sharing it so you remember, you have the right to rise, you have the right to be respected, you have the right to start over at any age, under any circumstance. It is never too late. If you've experienced something like I did, a look of contempt, a cruel word, or being pushed out of the very home you built, please share your story in the comments. Not just because I want to hear it, but because there are so many others out there who need a little hope, a reminder that they are not alone. Because I truly believe when we as women begin to speak, extraordinary things happen. And if this story touched you, please click subscribe, not just to support me, but so you don't miss the next story that might be exactly what you need to take one more step forward. Share this video with your mom, your sister, your best friend, or anyone who needs to hear one simple truth. You deserve to be loved. And if I could send you off with just one final sentence, it would be this: you don't need revenge. Your peace is the deepest revenge of all. So live well, stand tall, and believe this with all your heart. Even if the world turns its back on you, you still have yourself.